Hey everybody, welcome to another Saturday Conundrum. Now, in this episode, we are having a chat about something I think about a lot, which is the idea of the world getting just a little bit noisier in the world or future of AI. Here's what I mean by that. Look, right now, we obviously all talk on our phones. There's always the annoying people who talk on speakerphone in public places. So it's not that we don't already have noise or that we're not hearing other people's communications. But with AI and things truly moving more and more towards multimodal, the idea that somebody might be talking to an AI pin on their chest or their meta glasses on their face or into their watch or into their phone in other means or in other devices, wearable devices that we haven't really even thought about yet, the idea that you would just be talking out loud to AI sort of becomes a real one. And that means that there's just a possibility of there being more noise. Well, on the flip side, there's also a possibility of actually really helping people with maybe disabilities and other things that could actually be really helpful. So here's the conundrum, right? As voice spills from headphones into the open, do we recalibrate public life to accept constant audible exchanges with machines, knowing it may fray the quiet fabric that lets strangers coexist? Or do we safeguard shared silence and boundaries, knowing we are also muffling a technology that grants freedom to many who were previously unheard? There's no stable compromise. Whichever norm hardens will set the tone for every street, train, and cafe. How should society decide what kind of public space it wants to inhabit? It's a really interesting question. There's definitely a lot of data and discussion on both sides of this, and I'm not really sure if there's necessarily a happy medium, although the two co-hosts that you're about to hear do discuss some possible solutions. So as always, if you haven't heard this show before, it's a bit of a departure from our normal Monday to Friday. Please join us, go listen to the other Daily AI Show episodes. Those are live shows recorded every weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can join us live or you can catch us on the replay in places like Spotify and YouTube and everywhere else. Likes and shares are always appreciated. This Saturday edition, these conundrums, of which we've done about 10 now, are just a different way, something unique in the sense that it always has a setup for me. And then what you're about to hear are two AI co-hosts that are going to debate both sides of this. Very quickly, the process I use is I start in ChatGPT and I go back and forth until I feel like I have a conundrum that I'm excited about. Then what I do is I put that in Perplexity and I use the the research to debate both sides of that. And then I do some editing there. And then finally it goes into Google's Notebook LM, maybe small tweaks there. And then you finally get the output. Sometimes I run it more than twice in order to get what you're about to hear. So that's the process. Always want to let people know that's what it is. And I just think it's a fun way to have interesting conversations while also using AI to have those conversations. All right, that's it for me this week. Enjoy the conversation.
Okay, picture this for a second. You're in a public space, maybe a crowded cafe, walking down a busy street, or even on public transport. For years, we've gotten used to people being plugged into their own worlds with headphones. But now, imagine the voices start coming out. You overhear someone talking to their jacket lapel, maybe a car dashboard near you is loudly giving directions, or the table next to you is quietly providing medical advice to someone. Voice AI is already in our ears, yeah. But the sources you've shared with us make it clear it's rapidly moving out of private listening and into the shared atmosphere of public spaces. It creates this slightly futuristic, but also kind of slightly jarring reality. Overhearing snippets of potentially private requests or conversations with machines happening everywhere. And right at the heart of these sources is this fascinating central conflict. For some people, this rise of ubiquitous voice AI feels like incredible liberation, like a technology finally removing barriers they've faced, giving them agency. But for others, it feels like a profound intrusion, something that fundamentally changes the very nature of public space itself, eroding privacy, quiet, maybe even that unspoken social contract we have in shared environments.
That really is the core conundrum these sources dive into, isn't it? This deep dive is all about exploring that difficult question. As voice AI becomes more integrated into our world, do we prioritize embracing its powerful accessibility benefits, the agency it grants individuals? Or do we need to focus more on protecting the shared atmosphere, the privacy, the kind of social fabric of our public spaces? And what's fascinating here is how the material you've provided argues this isn't a simple decision. There's no easy compromise in sight. The implications they suggest are pretty significant and potentially long-lasting.
Right. So our mission today is to really dig into these sources, understand the compelling arguments they present on both sides of this complex issue,
Yeah.
and see what's truly at stake as this technology steps out of our earbuds and, well, into the open air. Okay, let's unpack this.
So let's start with maybe the most powerful argument presented in this material. That's the case for accessibility. What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how these sources highlight voice technology specifically as a major breakthrough for disability rights. They actually describe it as one of the most significant advances in digital accessibility we've seen in decades. They go into some detail about how voice interfaces offer a completely new level of independence and autonomy. Think about individuals with, say, mobility impairments, visual disabilities, or certain cognitive challenges. The research includes this quote that really captures it, saying voice AI offers a new level of independence and accessibility, transforming everyday tasks into manageable and inclusive activities. That's a huge shift, a fundamental change in freedom and just daily life.
Yeah, and when you hear that, you immediately connect it back to things we already value as a society, don't you? We have legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act, these global principles of inclusive design. It seems like, based on the sources, trying to heavily restrict public voice AI could actually, well, bump up against these established frameworks, maybe even the basic human right to participate equally and to be heard.
Absolutely. And the sources aren't just talking about traditional disability categories either, which is important. They point out that the benefits actually extend much wider. Think about a parent trying to multitask, if maybe an elderly person dealing with age-related physical changes, someone with a temporary injury like a broken arm, or even just facing a situational barrier like, carrying groceries. The technology even supports diverse speech patterns and accents, apparently, which makes it more inclusive for users whose first language might differ from the system's default.
And the scale we're talking about is already significant. The sources give some context for that. They mention that approximately 20.5% of people globally already use voice search. And get this, there are over 8.4 billion voice assistants in use worldwide, over 8 billion. Among smartphone users in the US, 56% use voice search specifically to find information about businesses. So yeah, this isn't future sci-fi, it's widespread utility happening right now.
That scale really underlines what the sources call the liberation argument. It's about getting real-time help, accessing information, or controlling devices without needing a screen or a keyboard. It frees up your hands and eyes. For visually impaired users specifically, the research says voice AI can, and I quote, partially replace the eyes. Assisting with navigation, helping recognize objects, making them more aware of their environment. It can even work with things like haptic feedback for guidance. It dramatically lowers the barriers to spontaneous information access, whether you need quick medical advice, maybe directions when you're lost, or a translation on the spot.
Wow, partially replace the eyes. That phrase is incredibly powerful. It really sounds like for many people, this isn't just about convenience. It's about regaining independence in crucial moments where traditional tech just isn't accessible.
Exactly. It transforms what's possible for a significant number of people. It really does.
But when you hear that scale, that potential for ubiquitous assistance, it naturally makes you think about the other side, doesn't it? The sources make it very clear there's a significant cost, or at least a trade-off when this technology moves into our shared physical spaces. What are the sources saying about that downside?
Well, they talk about it fundamentally changing the nature of public life itself.
Yeah.
The research points to what they describe as the fragile social contract of public spaces. Those unspoken rules we generally follow, maintaining reasonable noise levels, respecting each other's privacy, not demanding everyone's attention all the time. The sources even cite existing research on noise pollution in urban areas, showing how it's already linked to things like traffic and is negatively impacting health. Our shared acoustic environment is, it's already pretty stressed, and the sources use this incredibly impactful phrase they warn that public spaces could become. Get this, involuntary feeds of other people's data, noise, and anxieties. Think about that for a second. If everyone around you is audibly interacting with an AI, maybe discussing sensitive or private matters, what happens to that shared sense of space? That ability for strangers to just coexist in a relatively quiet, neutral environment.
That phrase, involuntary feeds, is chilling.
Yeah. And it goes right to the privacy and surveillance concerns you mentioned. These voice AI systems, they're designed to collect data. And the sources note this includes voice patterns that can reveal surprisingly sensitive personal details. Things like height, weight, ethnicity, personality traits, and possible health issues from your voice. So when these systems are operating openly in public, it essentially turns anyone nearby into an unwitting participant in a surveillance network. And The context the sources provide on the regulatory landscape is important here, too. They highlight a general lack of comprehensive legal frameworks, specifically around public voice data collection. They mention only a handful of U.S. states with relevant laws, just 4, I think. And you couple that with a lack of transparency from many companies about how this data is collected, stored, used. Well, it creates a significant privacy vulnerability in public spaces.
Definitely. And let's not forget the pure noise aspect, which the research specifically flags as a problem. They cite studies linking excessive noise exposure to serious health issues, things like high blood pressure, heart disease, even low birth weight. So it's not just annoying, it's actually harmful. And as the sources note, even places you'd expect to be quiet, like urban parks, often exceed WHO guidelines for community noise levels already. Our environment is already dominated by anthropogenic noise, human-generated sound. Adding another layer of constant audible AI interaction, it feels like piling onto an acoustic environment that's already suffering.
Mhm. And this leads to what the sources call the ambient computing dilemma. See, the ideal vision for ambient computing is technology that kind of fades into the background, almost invisible, just seamlessly assisting you. But voice AI, by its very definition, requires you to speak aloud for it to work. That inherently violates the idea of fading into the background because it spills into the shared acoustic space. It has to. And some research on ambient intelligence raises concerns not just about privacy, but also about technologically induced dependence and potentially new forms of social control as our physical environments become saturated with responsive, potentially always listening devices.
Okay, so that covers the powerful arguments for accessibility and liberation, but also the significant concerns about privacy, surveillance, noise, and just changing public space. It feels like a real conflict, a genuine clash. Can technology itself bridge this gap? Are there technical fixes mentioned in the sources that could maybe solve this problem?
Well, the sources do explore some technological mitigation strategies.
Yeah.
Yes. They discuss things like using bone conduction headphones, the ones that transmit sound through your bones so only you can hear it, or haptic feedback, which uses touch instead of sound. They also mention advanced noise canceling to try and isolate your voice, directional audio that focuses the sound just towards you, or maybe future wearable AI devices that might communicate over private channels. The material suggests these technologies can address aspects of the problem, perhaps reducing the audible spill for the person using the device, for instance.
Okay, so there are technical ways to make it less disruptive, maybe, potentially, but the sources still call this a conundrum with no stable compromise. If technology can fix some of the issues, why is that the conclusion? Why no compromise?
That's the crucial point the sources really emphasize. Even with those potential technical fixes, they argue the core conflict remains because the competing values are, well, fundamentally incompatible in their purest forms. If you fully encourage ubiquitous, open voice AI for maximum accessibility everywhere, you necessarily erode acoustic privacy and quiet in public spaces for everyone else. You just do. But if you try to strictly preserve acoustic privacy and quiet in public spaces by restricting voice AI, you necessarily limit the spontaneous access and agency for the very people who benefit most from it. The vision of truly pervasive ambient computing, it relies on that ubiquity to be seamless. And that ubiquity directly clashes with the value of preserving quiet, private, public space. So the sources suggest you basically have to make a choice about which value you prioritize in a given context or space. And that choice inevitably comes with a cost to the other value. There's no getting around that trade-off.
It sounds like it's not just a technical problem to be engineered away then. Not really. It becomes a fundamental societal choice, like who gets to decide what kind of public space we want to collectively inhabit.
Exactly. The source is very clear on this point. This cannot be left solely to market forces driving technological development. It just can't. It requires conscious public democratic deliberation about the kind of society and the kind of shared physical spaces we actually want to live in. And they list several key considerations that need to be part of this decision-making process. It's quite thoughtful. You have to consider the equity implications. How do we ensure whatever choices we make don't further marginalize already disadvantaged populations? You need to account for cultural differences. Different societies have different norms around public noise, balancing individual versus collective needs. There's the question of reversibility. Are the changes we make now permanent? Can we undo them if we don't like them? And critically, how do we ensure genuine democratic input from the affected communities? The people who will actually live and move and exist in these reshaped public spaces.
So there's the tension. laid out really clearly in the sources. On one side, the incredible transformative benefits of voice AI for accessibility and liberation, offering unprecedented independence and agency for many individuals. And up against that, the potential costs fundamentally altering the acoustic and social fabric of our public spaces, introducing new forms of surveillance, increasing noise pollution, eroding privacy. It's a heavy list.
It's clear that both sides have really compelling arguments, doesn't it? And they're grounded in important principles. Human dignity, equal access, and liberation on one hand, balanced against social harmony, the concept of shared acoustic space, and protection from involuntary surveillance on the other. The sources really frame this as the defining choice we face in the 21st century, a big one. And this raises, I think, an important question for you listening right now. As you navigate the world and inevitably start to encounter and overhear these technologies emerging around you, maybe on a bus, in a shop, or a park, how do you weigh these competing values? What kind of public space do you want to inhabit in the age of ubiquitous voice AI?
We'll leave you with that thought to consider.